All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for another installment of the research webinar series hosted by our team here at the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute, or MVLRI. The goal of MVLRI is to expand Michigan's capacity to support new learning models, engage in active research to inform new policies in online and blended learning, and strengthen the state's infrastructures for sharing best practices. MVLRI is a division of MVU, or the Michigan Virtual University, a nonprofit organization whose mission is advancing K-12 education through digital learning, research, innovation, policy, and partnerships. MVU is also the parent company of Michigan Virtual School, a supplemental state-sponsored virtual school, as well as Michigan LearnPort, an online professional development portal for K-12 educators and personnel, and MyBlend, a blended learning initiative providing K-12 schools with resources, products, and services to personalize learning options for their students and improve student achievement. Before we begin, just a quick disclaimer. This webinar will be recorded and shared publicly. Consequently, anything shared during this webinar, including chat comments, could be shared publicly. This webinar may represent a presenter's or an attendee's personal views, opinions, conclusions, and other information which do not necessarily reflect those of MVU and/or the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute and are not given nor endorsed by MVU/MVLRI unless otherwise specified. We did want to make mention for all those of you who are in participation or in attendance today that you can participate using the chat window there. And if anyone would like to use the microphone at any point of our attendees, I'd be happy to unmute or give you microphone rights so that you could pose a question through audio as well. Today, we welcome Dr. John Hughes, who is the Associate Director for the Florida Center for Reading Research and the Deputy Director of the Regional Education Laboratory Southeast. His primary interest is in conducting applied research that can help inform public policy. He has conducted research and program evaluations at all levels of the educational spectrum, from pre-K to higher education. He has been an education analyst for the Florida Legislature, the program manager for Florida's early learning programs, and the associate vice chancellor for research at the Florida College System. His current work is primarily K-12 oriented, with a focus on helping states better utilize their data systems to inform decision making. Dr. Hughes holds his PhD in political science from the University of Florida. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Hughes. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Justin. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm excited to be able to share the results of a study that we finished a little while back. So I'll just sort of walk everybody through it. We started off actually with a series of research questions that came about from thinking about what made virtual learning in the Southeast maybe a little bit different than other regions, because that's the region that we represent as part of the RAL Southeast. And one of the things that sort of kept coming up in the research that we were looking at was a really heavy reliance or interest in credit recovery. Students who had failed a course and were retaking it. And it seemed like, at least in Florida and in some of the other southeastern states, as well as nationally, there was an interest in using online courses as a mechanism for addressing these credit recovery situations. So we developed a study around that. We have three basic research questions. The first one is about the likelihood of earning a C or better in what I'm going to call general academic courses. And these are not credit recovery. This is just sort of opening the investigation by looking at regular courses that students take for the first time. They haven't failed them previously, and we wanted to know for those kinds of courses what was the likelihood of success, earning a C or better, and was it different between online and face-to-face courses. Then the second research question really focuses specifically on a subset, which is credit recovery courses. And then the third research question really focused on, do these differences, whatever is found for that, do they vary for certain subgroups of students? In other words, do the results hold up or differ across groups of students? So before we get into that, let me just, one of the things that had come up during some of the analysis was, to what extent were the online students different from face-to-face students? And so what we did is we split the sample up into students who took at least one online class and students who did not take an online class at all. And then we looked at the demographic differences. And let me take a step back and say The data for this comes from Florida. It's almost entirely the Florida Virtual School, which I think is the largest one in the country. There's a smattering of district level virtual school students in the sample that we had pulled, but almost all of it, really about 98% or something like that, were Florida Virtual School students. So, all right, so coming back to that. So what you have here are two sets of results. One is, they're a little bit different, although the charts look very similar. The one on the left-hand side, the percent of all students, is basically a comparison of the demographic distribution of online versus face-to-face students. So on the black bars, you have students who took only face-to-face courses, and in the brown bar, you have students who took at least one online class and perhaps more. And what you can see looking at that is that the brown bar, the online students, were a little bit more likely to be white, but less likely to be Black, Hispanic, eligible for school lunch, in special education, or ELL students. So they're clearly different demographically. On the right-hand side, what we did was sort of say, okay, what differences might there be academically? And of course, that's not an easy thing to measure. So what we used is the state assessment in Florida, which is the Florida Comprehensive Assessment Test, the FCAT. And we split the sample into those who had scored proficient on the FCAT versus those who had not. And then we compared it for, again, the online versus the face-to-face. And we did it within subgroups. So this one is within the group of, and so for example, within the group of white students, the face-to-face students were less likely to have passed the FCAT than the online students. Within the black subgroup of students, online students were more likely to have passed the FCAT. Same thing for Hispanic, eligible for free reduced price lunch, special education, and ELL. So what that told us is that across every demographic subgroup, the students who took online courses were slightly more likely to have passed the FCAT than students who never took an online class. Now, we do not know why that is, whether that's a guidance counselor thing or whether it's the result of self-selection by students and confidence. But regardless, they are demographically different. And so that led us to sort of that third question of really focusing on looking at subgroup analyses. And you'll see in a minute how we did that. First thing we did was we took what we call the general online classes. So this is all of the just typical classes that students take. And again, these are students taking them for the first time. They're not failures or repeats. And in order to make a valid comparison between the online classes and the face-to-face classes, we wanted to look at the exact same mix of courses. So if online were different courses than face-to-face and we compared outcomes, it wouldn't be quite an apples-to-apples comparison. So what I did was identify the top 20 most common online academic courses. So these are the top 20 most popular online classes with an academic focus. And then I selected those as the sample to compare to face-to-face. So whenever you see the face-to-face comparison, it's these same 20 courses. Now I should note that we excluded a few courses from the data set, notably within Florida, and I don't know how this might be in Michigan or other places. Three or four of the top courses in terms of popularity were driver's education and physical education, PE. And so those were removed from the analysis and we focused on online only. And I see there is a question from Susan, and yes, Susan, these are high school courses only. So here are the 20 classes, and here you can see what the online enrollments were, or get a sense of it over the course of the data set. So what we did was a logistic regression that predicted the probability of a student succeeding in the course, and success was defined as a C or better. Now we picked that because typically a C is what students are aiming to get. You obviously can get credit with a D, but the high school required GPA is a 2.0, so we targeted C as sort of a successful outcome. And so we then took the data and separated it by grade level and by FCAT score. So at the bottom, let me just sort of orient you to the chart. At the bottom, you'll see that the table is divided into two panels, or the figures divided into two panels. One is the FCAT 3+, and the other is FCAT below 3. FCAT 3 plus is the students who were proficient on the FCAT, and below 3 are students who are not proficient. And then you can see the grade level as well. So what we did is for each grade and each FCAT subgroup, we predicted the probability of a student earning a C or better, moderated by whether or not that course was taken online versus face-to-face. And a couple patterns show up pretty readily. One is that at the lower grade levels, there is a bigger gap between the online and the face-to-face, and that gap closes as you move up the grade levels. But essentially what you see is students were more likely to earn a C or better online than they were face-to-face. Difference being larger in 9th grade and declining till its 12th grade where there was virtually no difference. If you kind of look at the just horizontally across the that first panel, you'll see that for an online class, regardless of grade, students pass at a level of about 88 to 89%. And then what happens is the chances of earning a C or better increase from about 80% for the face-to-face courses in 9th grade up to about that same almost 90% in 12th grade. So the odds don't really change for the online students, but they do change for the face-to-face courses across the grade levels. Looking in the second panel, not if this error, okay, error's not showing up. Looking at the second panel, you'll see that for the students who are not proficient, the odds of success were lower, but there's a larger gap between the face-to-face and the online. So about a 15 percentage point gap in 9th grade that closes to a 2 to 3% gap in later grades. So again, the gap closing, but it doesn't disappear entirely. So the general walk away from this one is that in regular courses, the popular academic classes, being online increased the chances of success over face-to-face, and that difference was largest in the 9th grade and larger for students who are less proficient than other students. The next thing we wanted to do was break that down by demographic subgroup, which creates this sort of very busy graph. So let me try to walk you through it really quick. So what you'll see at the bottom is that we've divided the sample into demographic subgroups: Black students, Hispanic students, students on school lunch programs, special education, and ELLs. Within each of those, you've got 4 sets of bars that are for the FCAT proficient and the FCAT not proficient. And then on the graph, what we're graphing is the difference between the predicted probability online versus face-to-face. So if the bar is positive, it means you are more likely to be successful, earn a C or better online than face-to-face. And if the bar is negative, then you are more likely to succeed face-to-face than online. So what you can see immediately looking across it is across almost all the subgroups, there are positive differences. The bars are almost always positive. You can also see that as you move up grade levels, move from grade 9 to 10 to 11 to 12, that those differences get closer and closer to 0. And in some cases, you'll see that there's bars that are missing from the sequence, and that is because, such as right in here, there's missing bars. That's because there was no statistically significant difference. So, for example, for students in school lunch programs who were proficient on the FCAT, in 9th grade there was a positive difference with online being more successful, and in 12th grade there was a negative difference. But in 10th and 11th, there was no difference. So you can see again that same pattern of it changing over grade level. It's also consistently larger when you're dealing with non-proficient versus proficient in each case. And so the patterns seem to be pretty similar across the subgroups, with the exception of ELL students, of English language learners. And here what we see is that there is no difference in the performance online or face-to-face of ELL students until 12th grade for non-proficient students when they performed worse online than face-to-face. But otherwise, there is no difference. So the point there being is their probability of success was equal regardless of the modality, except for 12th graders who were not proficient for that one small subgroup. All the rest of the demographic subgroups, the differences were, or the pattern matched that of the overall group of students. So then we move on to the actual credit recovery courses. On this slide, you see the list of the credit recovery courses that were in the analysis. Again, these are the 20 most common ones selected. They look like the typical kinds of classes that students take: English 1, geometry, biology. We did find it interesting that there were a number of honors classes that students are retaking. We're really not entirely sure why that's the way it is, but that's what the data showed. And so this is the sample of courses that we looked at, and the analyses were essentially the same as what we saw before. So we divided up into proficient and non-proficient students and looked by grade level. But here you can see that the differences are much, much larger. So for example, proficient students in 9th grade, you can see that the predicted probability of success is about 60% in a credit recovery course, face-to-face, but around 95% for an online student in that same kind of set of courses. Again, the online courses are about the same over the grade levels, hovering around that low to mid 90s, while in the face-to-face courses, it rises by grade level from 60% to about 90%. There was still a difference, positive difference for online courses in 12th grade for proficient students. And then looking over at the other panel, you see the exact same pattern that you have on the other one. Essentially, a high probability of success across all grade levels for the non-proficient students online, and an increasing probability across the face-to-face students, but still an advantage online across the board. Does that make sense? Susan, I think I answered your question, hopefully. So the net takeaway for this is online students taking credit recovery courses were significantly more likely to be successful, earning a C or better, than students taking the same courses face-to-face in a credit recovery situation. There are certified teachers, this is for Catherine, there are certified teachers in both. The time frame will actually vary for the virtual school courses. My understanding, and I could be wrong about this, is that they have to complete within an academic year, but they can go faster. So I think they were given at least the same amount of time, but could take less if they chose to. So moving next into the findings, yes, they could take their time. So moving next into the demographic subgroup breakdown, you'll see the pattern is very similar to what we saw with the regular online courses, but the differences are much larger. That's to be expected, because remember, these bars again are the difference between online minus face-to-face. So positive bars mean online probabilities were higher in terms of success. And you can see again, or see here, you've got percentages like 25, 35% more likely in some 9th grade groups to succeed online, or percentage points higher, not more likely, but 25 to 35 percentage points more likely to succeed online than face-to-face in 9th grade. It declines to 12th grade to be much lower, but still in many cases it's positive, or it's essentially the difference is zero. See where the bars are missing? The interesting case here, of course, is the ELL students. The ELL students are ones who, the ELL students, there is no difference, positive or negative, across any of the grade levels or for any of the proficiency levels. So that was kind of an interesting takeaway, that ELL students simply perform about the same online versus face-to-face. It's interesting because this is kind of a nuanced finding. They don't do as well as, say, other students do online, but they don't do worse than if they had taken it face-to-face. So most other students are advantaged taking it online. ELL students, there's no disadvantage either way. Susan, I'm reading your question. They were not, it is this, yes, the way we coded the credit recovery, Florida has a code for it, so we used that. It wasn't perfect. So in addition, what we did was constrain the data to courses where the student had taken that same course, failed it, and retook it. That probably accounts for some of the honors courses showing up. So they had to have an F initially, and then they retook it afterwards. And we also checked timing on that. So it had to be in sequence, F, then a retake. I'm waiting for Susan's question to pop up. And yep, they did well overall. So again, that being the overall, I think, there's stuff we can extrapolate that's outside the scope of the report. I think this change from 9th to 10th to 11th to 12th grade is interesting. I don't know what's going on, why even in the face-to-face courses the odds are going up consistently across the years. My guess is there's some kind of social effect of, as students get closer and closer to graduation, they're less likely to fail, more likely to pass the second time. I don't really know what's going on there, but it's kind of interesting to see. So really that brings us kind of to the end. I'll summarize really quickly. In grades 9 to 11 in Florida, students are more likely to earn a C or better when taking a regular online academic course. In 12th grade, remember, there was essentially no difference. It was very, very small. For most subgroups, they were also more likely to succeed in online classes. The gap is highest in 9th grade, and it diminishes over to 12, getting smaller by 12th grade. ELL students showed very little differences, particularly with the credit recovery courses, where they didn't perform worse, but they also didn't perform better. Now, one caveat I want to throw out there is that this is a very blunt measure of success and learning. It's earning the credit by getting a C or better. We obviously did not, in this analysis, measure actual learning. We don't know if there's a grade inflation issue going on. We can't get at those kinds of issues, at least not with the data that we had available. Most of these courses don't have end of course exams, for example, so they were unavailable to do that kind of analysis. So we can't determine whether this is causal or due to greater student learning. But on the other hand, from a sheer policy perspective, it is interesting to see that a guidance counselor who, for example, recommends a student to an online setting in Florida is probably helping the student more than one who's sending the student to a face-to-face course, at least in terms of them being able to earn the credits for graduation. We had wanted to do an analysis of how these students did in subsequent courses, but there simply wasn't enough data for us to do that. So that may be something we can obtain in a later date. Susan, I will apologize. I do not have any sense of why they did that. We actually do have some analyses, but I don't remember how they did looking at A, B, and higher courses, higher grades. But no, I don't actually have the answer to that one, so I'm sorry. The FCAT that I used to split them is the same for everybody. We did not have end of course exams for any of these courses, so they would use the same assessment if they had it. So for example, Algebra 1 during this time frame just started using end of course exams. Biology, geometry, and some others were added, but they happened after the range of the data that I have. So let me sort of wrap up with just a couple things, and then I'll see if there are any more questions, so please feel free to type. You can find this report at the study link that's listed below. You can also find all of the REL publications and other IES publications at the link listed above. This study was funded by the Institute for Education Sciences through the Regional Education Lab program. And so we did this on behalf of the state, but at no cost to the state because it was funded by IES. I should mention that the RELs are labs that cover the entire country. There are 10 of them. In Michigan, the one that covers you guys would be the REL Midwest. So I encourage you guys to reach out to them and talk to them if there are additional things you would like to think about doing in your region. We are limited to, of course, the Southeast, but the REL Midwest covers your area. And I'm sure they would be happy to chat with you guys. Susan, I'm looking at your question now. So the FCAT was the prior year FCAT prior to taking the course. I should have said that earlier on. So what we did was we divided, we looked at the students based upon how they did before they took the course. So the FCAT was a control variable to help take into account the fact that these students might be better performers to begin with. Remember that chart at the very beginning that showed that the FCAT students were more likely, the FACE online courses students were more likely to have passed the FCAT. That's in the prior year. So they're a slightly better group of students to begin with. So by splitting them up into like or similar groups of students, those who passed the FCAT versus those who didn't, we're sort of trying to compare similar quality students, if you will. That's a horrible phrase, but you understand what I'm trying to get at. Students with similar academic backgrounds, so that it's kind of an apples to apples comparison. So that's why we controlled for the FCAT score. Other questions? Yeah, the C or better is in the course itself. So if the course was, I'll go back to them. So if the course was English 1 for credit recovery, it is what is the probability of earning a C in English 1 while controlling for your FCAT score and student demographics. I apologize if I flew through that too quickly. I cannot speak, Cindy, to the instructional support. It is unknown. I mean, that's not something we investigated. I know that for the online courses, they range dramatically from, in some cases, these students are basically put in a computer lab and told, take your English 1 or geometry during this period while you're in the lab. In other cases, they're working at home on their own. So there's a variation that I can't control for, so yeah, I don't know the answer to that one. Bobby, there is not a plan at the moment. We haven't been asked to do that for the Georgia Virtual School, but it's something certainly we would be open to discussing with the state on. And we'd have to talk, obviously, the logistics of doing a study, but the RELs, just to put in a pitch for them more generally, do applied educational research on behalf of stakeholders within their region, and stakeholders include the state education agencies, but also local agencies. So basically, we look at the needs within the region, and when stakeholders approach us with a question, we try to figure out a project we can do if we have the resources to do it.
Hey, John, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, this is Diane Mays, and I work for Connections Education, and I work for the specific division that is our blended high school programs in Ohio and Indiana and Michigan. And one of the things we've been looking at, our program has we've only had the blended high school program for 4 years. So we're sort of looking at it as a broader question across Connections Academy schools that have high schools, but also within our schools because they do have the part on-site component with the blended program. Do you have any reason to believe that the population of students from the time you did your study or the data that you used for this study, which was 07, 08 through 2011. Do you have any reason to believe that the population of students seeking online courses or seeking blended learning has shifted? And what I mean by that is, when I first started at Connections Academy schools 6 years ago, it seemed like we had a lot of the students like you described in your study. A higher percentage of white students versus minorities, a lower percentage of students that would qualify for free and reduced price meals, a much lower percentage of special education. I would say in the past 3 years, we are seeing much higher percentages of students that are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. Both our ELL and our special education populations are growing, and those are even more so in the blended program than they are in our fully virtual schools, as well as a higher percentage of minorities students. And they seem to be also a growing population of students that come to our high school program already off cohort. So they've already experienced failing some courses, and they're now off grade level for where they should be. And this is a conversation we're starting to discuss. Is the population that seeks online learning, now that it's come more into the mainstream, is it possible it's shifted and the kids we're seeing are the ones coming more for credit recovery, for support, because I don't know. Are we losing the kids that we were originally getting, or are we just getting more of the kids seeking our program for support because they heard so many positive things about it? I guess I was just wondering if you had any indication of any of that from all the data that you have in Florida.
So Florida's a unique case in that around the time that this data ended, around 2011, the law went into effect mandating every student take at least one virtual course before graduation. So in Florida, this difference that we see here will disappear entirely, because eventually it's going to be 100% for everybody. So, the black bar will essentially go away. There will be no students who only took a face-to-face class, at least by the time they graduate. So, but I think more generally you're correct. I think each new generation, if you will, each new couple set of grades of students moving up are going to be more technologically savvy, more used to it, more open to the idea, and a lot of them are experiencing it now in middle school and so forth. So I suspect some of this would definitely change. I know it would change in Florida because of the law, but I would imagine it's changing in terms of practice. So in terms of your comment about whether you're losing or gaining, I think you're probably gaining, and you're probably just seeing a significant increase in that subset of students because you're seeing an increase across the demographic diversity of all of the students. That'd be my best guess. Any other questions? It is on the IES website, which is here. It should also be, if you Google REL Southeast, it'll be on our website. And I don't know about the Michigan one. Thank you, Catherine. So yeah, as you know, future work, I do think there's an interesting opportunity to look at subsequent courses, how these students do in a follow-up. I will tell you, just share why people are following up on this, that there's the challenge that we encountered in that was finding enough sequence of courses. So sort of stepping here. So these are the online credit recovery courses. You can see the most popular here was English 1, which kind of surprised me because I didn't think that many people failed English, but it is what it is. And it turned out we had a fair number of students in English 2 that we could follow. But think about geometry. What would be the subsequent course to a geometry class? Is it Algebra 2? Or if these students move into statistics or something else, what is that course? If these students fail biology, what is their subsequent course? Is it chemistry? And is their performance in biology expected to be related to their performance in chemistry? So what ended up happening was we were unable to really create a series of sequences of courses that would logically say A leads to B, therefore your performance in B should be related to whether or not you learned in A, and so B becomes a indicator of your performance in A. We couldn't do that. We couldn't find enough of them. As it turned out, the only thing we had enough data for was English 1. Even some of these others like Spanish 1 to Spanish 2, there simply weren't enough cases in our data set to manage that. And this is within Florida, which we have, several 100,000 students moving through a grade level in a year. But I think that is a great idea for a future study. The one I would, and then I'll get to Susan's question in just a minute. The one I would do next, or the two I would do next most specifically is I would look at ELL students because let me find that one. I got it. I'm clicking too fast. There we go. I am really curious as to what's going on, why this pattern shows up. Is this a language proficiency, a reading issue? Does this hold up in ELA classes, English Language Arts classes versus math classes? We could subset this a little bit and try to look at it. We've put in a proposal to do that follow-up work. We're waiting to see if that's gonna be approved. So that's the first thing I would do. There's also some things I would like to look at that we didn't do in this one. Like, for example, what happens if a student's first course that they failed was online and now they're doing a retake and the retake is online, or the retake switches from online where they failed it to face-to-face in the subsequent. So I'd like to actually look at that sort of matrix of possibilities, all that sort of modality shift. So from face-to-face to online, from online to face-to-face, repeating face-to-face, repeating online, across that credit recovery barrier to see if maybe, for example, are there students who, taking it online initially and then failing it, you aren't likely to do well online the second time. So maybe online just isn't good for you, and you needed to really switch to face to be successful. So there's some ways we could begin to really look at some subgroups and really kind of dig into what's happening there. So let me, yes, Bobby, I think that's a good point. That could very well be. Well, I'm losing slides here. Let me go back. So I had a question from Susan. Let me scroll up to make sure I get it. Such a different profile and credit compared to Michigan. Oh, okay, that's for Catherine. Where the face-to-face actually credit recovery courses Drews take earn credit. Well, I will say that's a good point. They were a combination, both for face-to-face and for the online. There are specific credit recovery courses that are called credit recovery. That data element did not appear to be used consistently. So we supplemented with students who failed and then retook the course. Now I will say they weren't grade recovery courses, like a student got a D or a C and then retook it. They were excluded. It was, in fact, somebody who had an F and then retook the course. So Catherine, yeah, I don't know if they're encouraged or not, because I actually don't know the numbers, but I have heard anecdotally that a lot of schools do push the students into the online classes for their credit recovery because they're difficult to deal with, and putting them in a lab or whatever is an easier way to schedule things. I don't know if that's really true or not. Those are just things that people say. Yeah, the online, yeah. Well, so one thing we didn't look at, one thing that could have, that we would have to double check to see if there was a way for it to slip was we looked at students who are retaking the same class. We tried to collapse courses, so Algebra 1 Honors could be treated the same if you're as a retake. But it's interesting that a number of students would fail an Algebra 1 Honors and then retake an Algebra 1 Honors again. I don't understand that. If I missed something, somebody let me know. So, Catherine, I think I covered that. I would look at the right now. I'm proposing to look at the ELL students, and then I want to look at really the actual modality shift. I want to start to think about the nuances of, okay, online courses might be good on average across students. Are there some subsets that are simply not as well suited for it? And some of that will require some data we don't have, in-depth data, maybe with individual students, but we can possibly get some clues by looking at things like students who fail classes online initially. How do they do if they change to face-to-face versus how do they do if they retake it online? And of course, ELLs is really interesting, and I think it's something that the Florida Department of Education is interested in us following up on. So we're discussing that project with them now. Yep, I think Susan, your worry is exactly what a lot of people have. So the third area for future research, which I kind of forgot about, is subsetting this to look at just courses with end of course exams. So those didn't exist in Florida at the time of the analysis, but many of them do now and will certainly as the years go on. So you're looking at your biology, your chemistry, your geometry, your algebra 1 and 2. Those courses all have end of course exams, and you could look at, instead of the likelihood of earning a C, you could look at the likelihood of passing that course. And you're right, that might affect the results. At this point, there's no way of knowing. The interesting part for that is what happens if it did. From a policy standpoint, you have something that successfully helps students graduate, as Bryce pointed out, but may or may not, and that's debatable at this point, provide the same academic rigor. So, Susan, the control for the FCAT was a necessity. Yeah, I mean, I think it's not 100%, but it's a decent proxy for whether this was a strong or weak student. I think over time, it might have been interesting to look at things like how many courses had the student failed elsewhere, what was their overall GPA. We didn't really have the time to put into those. And what IES wanted us to focus on were sort of objective measures, so to speak, which was the FCAT scores. GPA would be a legitimate measure. We just didn't use it in this case. It is prior FCAT. It's the previous year FCAT, or if you're a 12th grader, you might have finished the FCAT in 10th grade. So it's either your 10th grade FCAT or the prior year. And yes, at the time it was given annually from grades 3 to 10. Well, I'm glad that gives you things to think about. It did us. We're hoping to continue doing work with the department in this area over the coming years. Again, I encourage you guys to talk to your RELs. Not all of you might happen to be in the Midwest area. I will tell you, just so that everybody is sort of aware, in case you do go that route, the RELs are on a 5-year contract, and we're ending the 4th year and starting the 5th year, and they'll be recompeted after that. So there's not a lot that they can do in the last year, but if you reach out to them, they certainly can make plans for what might happen in the next cycle. And that's what we're working on now, where we can start some work beginning at the next cycle and hopefully have some additional follow-up studies. I'm glad you liked it, Bobby. Well, thank you all for joining me, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I hope it was helpful, and I'm glad y'all were able to join us.
Thank you so much, John. That was a fantastic, very in-depth presentation, very helpful research for sure. So we want to thank you for taking the time to come and share it. Before we wrap up today, just want to mention a couple other MVLRI initiatives for folks who may not be aware. We have 2 initiatives that are ongoing right now. The first is our Virtual Viewpoints podcast, which you can actually listen to by clicking that link there. We have 20-minute conversations or so with researchers, policymakers, practitioners, anyone involved in the field of online and blended learning and trying to get a feel for how they apply research in their own work. So some very informal conversations and just trying to establish some connections and give folks an idea about the direction that they want to go in our field. The second initiative there is our guest blogger program. So if you're out there, you have some research that you want to share or some practice that you want to share, we would be happy to host you through our guest blogger program. You can click that link there and be a blogger, and we will obviously share your post to our audience on our own blog platform. So if you have questions about either of those initiatives, please feel free to email me. I'll put my email down here in the chat window. Some upcoming events for MVLRI before we wind down the year. We actually have a webinar today, now in about an hour and 15 minutes. We have been asked to share some of our research and some of our own resources with the REMC Association of Michigan, and that'll be happening today at 4 p.m. So if you're interested, you can actually click that link to register there. And as I mentioned, we'll be providing a bit of an overview about what mentoring online learners looks like, how that kind of takes shape, takes form, and we'll be talking about a number of our own resources and some of the research that some fellows of ours have done around mentoring online learners. So if you're interested, feel free to join up. And then lastly, as I mentioned, this is our time where we wind down the year. This is our last webinar of the year. So we encourage you to check back with us in the new year. Until then, feel free to email us, mvlri@mivu.org. Provide any sort of suggestions or feedback you have for any of our resources, our work, especially this webinar series. You can sign up for our mailing list if you click that link there in the second line. And then you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. All of our handles are listed there. And all of our recordings of each of our webinar sessions are posted on our YouTube channel, which you can find. Our YouTube handle is MVLRI1. And this recording will be up probably within 24 hours or so. So you can expect to share this or refer back to it within about 24 hours on our YouTube channel. And then to see a list of upcoming webinars, you can check out our website at mvlri.org/presentations/webinars. Again, thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the rest of your 2015, and we look forward to working with you in 2016. Enjoy your holidays. Take care.